Well, I think you're right that when there's a lot of bad literature that comes into any sort of area, it does depress the entire market because people get fed up with it, you know, and they want to move on to something else. I think that's happened with serial killer books here in this. It's harder to write one that does well because there's so many bad ones.
Yes.
And, you know, other kinds of, in fact, I think the whole mystery world at the moment is suffering a saturation of too much, you know, and too much that isn't good, and it's in a depressed state.
Well, that was why I was very anxious to write one when I did, because I could see that it was going to be the coming market, because at that time there wasn't much between Harlequin and the sort of Booker Prize type literature. There wasn't much in the way of the sort of book you give to a friend on a wet day and say, or a friend who's having troubles and say, oh, have this, it'll, you know.
Make you feel better.
That's right. And so I knew a lot of people were starting to read mysteries who never read them before.
So your Hamish Macbeth genesis then on Fifth Avenue was when, in the mid-'80s?
Yes, I wrote, the first one was published in 84, I think. No, I wrote it in 84.
Right.
I wrote it on top of a dressing table in a one-room service apartment in London. We just moved over to get the boy into grammar because he had to learn very quickly, you know, world geography.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he knew all the states in America and all the capitals, but he didn't seem to know
the rest of the world too well?
The rest of the world. And he had to learn Latin and French very quickly, and British physics and chemistry, and to sit the common entrance exam. And he went to Westminster School, which is down at the Abbey in London.
So you're back in London, and if I remember, Death of a Gossip was the first Hamish Macbeth.
That's right. That was the one I typed on the dressing table on a portable.
I recognized the plot description when you were talking about the fishing school.
Yes.
A perfectly ghastly woman who was murdered. And in fact, the real mystery is why she lived as long as she had, I thought, rather than. But, you know, it was a really entertaining mystery. I mean, obviously you set out to write something comedic, but there were a lot of barbs in it. There was a lot of satire.
Yes.
You know, it wasn't a chuckly cozy so much as I thought, you know, stab them.
Well, I have to be very careful not to make it funny for the sake of making it funny.
Right.
That's death. It's just you can't force humor. It's usually, particularly in the Agatha Raisins, it's usually something that's happened to me, because the first Agatha Raisin was a quiche of death, you see.
Right, and she'd been downsized from her London PR firm and moved to the Cotswolds.
That's right. So this was based on something I regret to say I did. My son's housemaster was raising money for the Ockenden charity, which helped Vietnamese boat people in Hong Kong or something.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry.
I'm jet cold. And he said, could we have some of that marvelous home baking? And I wasn't going to tell him I couldn't bake, let the side down, you know. Mm-hmm. So I went and I got 2 quiche. I bought 2 quiche. And I took them home and I put my own wrappings on them and sort of homemade labels. And they were a big success. They sold for 30p a slice.
Aha.
And that was the basis for Agatha, who wants to make her mark in the village by winning the great quiche baking competition. Only in her case, the judge drops dead from cowbane poisoning.
That's right, but she does come, that's true, I'd forgotten that. She brings in the store-bought quiche under the guise of home-baked, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and there she is off to start. But, you know, both in the Hamish Macbeth and the Agatha Raisin, you have given them each, you know, an on-off romance, which I assume, you know, is going to go on-off all the time because it puts a lot of tension in the plots. It's a whole subplot.
I don't know. Maybe I'll grow up and they'll get married. They'll grow up with me. But I don't like when detectives get married. They belong to me. They don't. I didn't like when Niall Marsh's Roderick Elaine got married.
You didn't?
No.
I always rather liked Troy.
No. I liked her all right, but not when she married to him, you see.
Mm. In fact, we're going to be reading A Clutch of Constables in September for the discussion club that we have, and it's really Troy's book, if you remember. when she goes off on the canal boat cruise.
That's it. I remember it very well.
Yeah.
I remember her description about how slowly it moved and seeing a steeple. And seeing it again, you know, it was a wonderful description of the
It is
canal
a
trip.
lovely description, and it's a cute title in the sense that, you know, it's a real double entendre, since they're looking for the paintings by John Constable, and of course, you know, there's the whole policing Constable
Yeah.
aspect of it and all. But I thought that Marsh did a nice thing into basically making it Troy's book, and Alan just has a kind of a walk-on part at the end where he has
Yeah.
to come in and snag the villains.
I liked the detective story. I really liked Josephine Tay,
Oh,
the
you too.
franchise affair.
Wasn't that a lovely
I
book?
think she is, and the Singing Sands, I think she's one of the most charming and the best detective story writers ever.
It's a shame there were only 8.
Yes, lovely writer. I like
Yeah.
very much.
Brett Farrar is the book we had at the end of the last year, when everybody was debating whether, you know, it was the end of the century or the dawn of the new, which is a different discussion. But anyway, the independent mystery booksellers, and there's an organization of us, decided that we would put together a list of 100 favorite mysteries of the century, the 20th century.
Yeah.
And there was much debate. Sometimes it came down to an author and which title. I mean, there was a lot of debate over Sayers, which of her books, you know, would be included. And with Josephine Tay, the one they ended up with was Brett Farrar,
Yes.
which I think is a lovely book about lost ears and, you know, mistaken identity and so forth, which I like. But I think for me, really, the franchise affair, which I know is flawed, but nonetheless, as a not murder mystery,
Yes. I
always
thought it
made
was
a deep
excellent.
impression.
Yes.
And I would think you would like it because it was based, in fact, on a real disappearance.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I knew Dorothy Sayers had nicked all the best Victorian court cases, including the arsenic one, from that famous lawyer, Marshall, what was it, famous Victorian lawyer. But as in Strong Poison, there was a case, a famous Victorian court case, of the fact that one man had poisoned the other, and he had trained himself to take enough arsenic so that it wouldn't affect him.
Yes.
And there were various others that she scooped up before I could get to them.
Too bad, because they were good stories. Yeah, I can't remember the name of the case that Tay used, but it was a quite well-known. I'm trying to remember if it was early 20th century or late Victorian or something. But anyway, it did involve a teenage girl who went missing inexplicably from her home, and in the end came up with, you know, this improbable explanation of having been kidnapped and held prisoner in order to disguise from her family the consequences of her act, and then she got caught. So it was kind of Tay mining journalism to get the story.
There was one in the papers yesterday. I was in Minneapolis, and I was reading the roundup of news, and there was one in the papers. Someone, oh no, it's a different thing. It was a wife who said she was kidnapped and mugged to cover up for the fact that she lost money at the casino. And she was charged with different thing. She was charged with wasting police time.
Well, there was an even sadder case of a mother who drowned her 2 sons, locking them in a car, and claimed that they had been kidnapped, and there were all kinds of other overtones. A really terrible story.
Yes.
And so, you know, it's not without precedent that people have had, you know, tried to cover up some sort of escapade or sin by fomenting a crime. But I thought Tay did it really well, and I liked the characters in that book so well.
I liked the 9 Tailors.
Well, see, that's the Dorothy Sayers that everybody thinks is the most riddled with, you know, with flaws as a novel, but which I've always liked.
I liked it because of the campanology.
Exactly.
Because of all the mathematical bell changes. Because in our village, there's bell ringing practice every Wednesday, and someone would cracked and locked them in the bell tower by sticking a broom handle across the door.
No.
She was so furious with it.
For all the noise. Well, I liked it too, and I also thought it was the only, well, maybe not the only Sayers novel, but it was hard to feel real. I mean, the killer, you know, there was certainly a very sympathetic element, you know, given the history that was involved in the.
Yeah, I like people, the murderer and the murderees, to be people you don't like.